Coming Around Again by Gwyn Chapter 2. I always heard that stuff about Spanish Fly was some kind of a con. Lute looked off to the river. The barge was coming in, maybe 4 miles down the river, and he had to clear the tracks of debris before he could bring the scrap buggies down. Hell and damnation, he swore richly at the whole business. We're going to have to move 50 buggies in here to make anything off the piece rate. Get that junk off the tracks, will ya? Well, is it a con, the kid said, never moving. No more of a con than you trading on your sister. I never heard of such a thing, Lute said. I can say that if I want to, the boy replied, posturing, waiting for Lute to make something of it. You can say it all right, but it isn't nice. It's not the thing. Lute spoke, thinking about the work and the heat ahead of him. But what if she is what I said she is? What if she really is? Lute stopped and looked at him. The kid was doing nothing but straddling the sun with his chin pushed out. Then you save her, Lute said, looking him down. You don't sell her to no floor manager for no piece rate kind of work. You save her. He took off his jacket and folded it neatly into his valise. Took off his shirt, folded it, felt the sun on his arms. It's already too hot, he told himself, watching the barge, timing himself off the slow progress of the barge down the river. Now, are you going to move that stuff off the track or what? He snapped at the kid. The boy finally did what he was told. He moved the debris from the tracks easily, even the bigger pieces. Lute watched his moves. Weight's nothing to him, he thought, pleased. His spirits improved. You ain't from around here, the boy said as Lute passed him, heading up the tracks for the buggies. Guessing are you? Lute said genially over his shoulder. You think you're good at guessing? Well, you sure ain't dressed for this kind of job, the kid said. You're not on the stem like a regular piecer, 'cause you got quality on your feet and on your back, and your pants don't show no wear. Good guessing, Lute grunted from the back of the first of the scrap iron buggies, trying to move it, and damned if he'd ask the boy for a hand. My name's China, the kid said, shouldering in beside him unasked. That's my real name, he said sideways next to Lute. China? Sounds like a made-up kind of name, Lute said, straining against the damned heavy scrap iron buggy. The wheels were rusted, and that made it heavy and hard to move. They were all going to be heavy and hard to move, he thought. What name does your mother call you? Horace, the kid mumbled. My mother named me, and then she beat it out of here. Together they managed to get the first buggy down to the pier. Lute was panting when they got it down. God, it's hot, he said, to cover what might be taken as a weakness. The boy said, You'll call me China? Why not? You can take any name you want, Lute said, sweating, looking back up the tracks. Piece rate, he thought sourly. What should I call you? Herbert Hoover, Lute said. Nah, I mean your real name, the one your mother calls you. I go by the name of Luther Trout, China, 'cause that's my real name, Sundays and holidays and all, Lute said, jollying the buggy into position on the pier and trying to lock its wheels. You got the track completely clear now to the water? I heard of a Luther Trout, the boy said, once again holding up the works. From up Saxon. You that Luther Trout, mister? Not today. Today I'm a railroad tycoon, Lute said, pulling a couple of pieces of wood off the track and throwing them into the water. Ah, the kid finished hauling the debris off the track, finally getting it clear. Or maybe I have come down here for to study on the mill and its operatives for the Peaburg Daily Chronicle, Lute said, mincing back to the other buggies, to move another buggy down to the pier. The Luther Trout I heard of worked up in the Saxon area with a tent show healer named of Josiah Waters. She knew him. The boy looked back at him to see what he thought of that. I hope she gave a good report, Lute said, shouldering against the second buggy, trying to move it down. Piece rate, he groaned to himself. How am I going to make anything off of this job at the piece rate? The Luther Trout she knew, the boy went on, pushing on the buggy. Even he was sweating in this light. Healed her crippled leg at one of those tent show revivals. Just lay off it for a while, will you? Lute said crossly. I am Luther Trout, and I did work for Josiah Waters, but I wasn't in the business of healing anyone. From the pace the barge was moving, it would be noon before they could load anything. I was a catcher for Josiah Waters, and I was a tout, but I wasn't any kind of healer. I was at that service, the kid said diffidently. Of course I was a lot younger, and I couldn't really see that much, being shorter and all, but it certainly seemed like it was you. It looked like you was in the sawdust with her. Give it over, I tell you. Lute stopped and looked at the kid eye to eye. Now, let's see you throw that rope, he said, wiping his handkerchief over his eyes. Let's see how far them fancy top muscles of yours can get that rope into the water. Lute locked the wheels of the second buggy. So was that stuff real Spanish fly? The kid took up the rope obediently enough. So what if it was or it wasn't, Lute said crossly. All you got to do is tell someone like that salesman, Solly Miller, back on the floor, that he's got hold of some Spanish fly and he'll get hard on conversation and come like Christmas. Whatever it was, I call it Vital, and I gave my last package of it to that street corner Jay just to get myself on this miserable job. I don't care if it's a con, the boy wrinkled his nose at the sun, and the rope in his hand spun out in the air and landed well into the water. I'm glad that what you gave Mr. Solly Miller was more of a fake kind of Spanish fly. To get this miserable job for myself, I really did give Mr. Solly one free pass on my sister who works down at Silver Susie's. I don't want that bastard to try nothing on her. Well, Lute reassured him, of course I wouldn't give the real thing to a mere floor manager, China. The real article comes in a fancy wrapper with a signed money-back guarantee. I wouldn't trade it for no piece-loading job. An amicable silence fell between them, an understanding. Let me get something to hold that front buggy, Lute said after a bit, and you give that rope one more throw. Lute looked out at the barge. That old floater should get here sometime before the world ends, and we want to be ready for it. And he looked on the ground for something to wedge into the front wheels. China threw vigorously, watching the rope arc into the air over the gray water, putting his back into it, while Lute bent to wedge the wood he found against the wheels of the scrap buggy. Ahead of them in the water, the bargeman scrambled over his pile of rusty scrap iron, waiting to get close enough so that he could take the rope. There was a splash and a long silence. Lute looked up. The rope, the boy, were gone. Then he heard the bargeman hollering, "Get out of there, you! Go on, get out of there! What do you want to do? You'll run into my boat." Then Lute saw him over the buggy, the bargeman dancing or seeming to dance on the scrap iron, and the boy was in the water. "Throw him a line," Lute called out. "Get him out. Throw a line to him." He could see the kid's head out of the water now. His arms were up. He was floundering, bobbing. "You throw him a line," the bargeman hollered back. "I ain't got no line. I ain't gonna swim off in no boat." And he scrambled back over the scrap. He picked up a piece of board and pushed it down over the side. Apparently he was going to try to keep the boy from running into his boat. And when China surfaced again, Luke could see that he was in real trouble, flailing in the water, doing nothing for himself. "My shoes," the kid cried. "Help me." By then, Lute had his own shoes off, his socks off, and his pants folded and laid neatly next to his valise. He stood in his shorts, looking at the gray river water. "Seems like it won't be no hot day after all," he said, to no one in particular. "Save him! Oh, jump in and save him!" the barger hollered, plowing at the water with his board. "Get on in there!" Lute edged himself into the water. Oil rimmed his waist. An old peel drifted by his armpit. Mud bottom, he thought, feeling into the water with his feet. "Good thing I didn't jump in. I'd be up to my butt in silt." He slid in gingerly and began to wade out to where the boy was floundering. Lute could tell the boy thought that he was in over his head. "For heaven's sake," Lute called to him, "put your feet down." "Help me," was all the answer he got. The kid wasn't listening. "Grab hold of this," Lute yelled, grabbing a piece of free-floating tree branch and passing it over for the boy to hold on to. "Grab on, I tell you." China thrashed and kicked his way over to it. Desperate, sure he was drowning. Wild in his moves, he gasped and flailed. His legs kicked out, and he knocked Lute down in the soup. "Oh, God," Lute gasped, going into it, feeling the muck oozing unspeakably. "Ugh," he said fervently, and grabbed for the branch before his own weight took him down again. On the edge of the moment, the bargeman dropped his old wood. Evidently short-sighted and still too far away to see anything, really, he danced over his metal and called out, "Ah, they're both going to drown. They are both of them drowning. Help them, somebody. Help! Help!" Lute leaned toward the bank, giving his legs a kick. "God," he thought, "this pier is a long way off." Kick! Kick, he told the boy, and he felt the boy's legs moving in the water, still in work boots, lumbering in the water. Kick! Apparently, there was no getting him to put his feet down. Though he could have walked well enough in this silt bed, he was too panicked to try. So Lute had to go on telling him to kick, kick, and half pushed, half hauled him toward the bank. He had so much mud in his own eyes that he really couldn't see where it was. He relied on the voices, the stir of voices that came from what he imagined must be the pier. The voices led him. Finally, he sensed that the boy was being pulled away, pulled up and out of the muck. That left him on his own, in the muck below the pier with his own weight on him, going deep into it, pushing against it, moving up through it, feeling solid ground and then out. He pulled himself out and sprawled in the sun, in the warm sun. He still heard the voices coming down to him from a long distance away. It's just a kid. Just come, fool kid. Put that shirt there on him so he don't catch no chill. My shirt, Lute thought regretfully. My last quality shirt. And he kneed himself out of the mud like an old frog. How the hell did he get in here? Someone yelled out. How the hell did he get out is what I want to know, another voice said. How did he get out? The first voice enunciated off the pier. Fella saved him. Pushed him out, the bargeman caroled. Where is that man now? Someone called. Oh, drowned, surely drowned. I saw him go under in the currents, in the undercurrents. The bargeman, Lute thought, trying to get up, has a talent for exaggeration. He felt himself, his side, his arms. He found the idea that he drowned very surprising and now calculated which arm, which leg might be counted on to get him up. He must be a kind of a hero, he thought. He saved a kid. And then he found he had to stay down, trying to get his legs to move him up. On the other side of the buggies, the voices go on. Should we send a boat out? Should we get someone to drag the river? Maybe the body will just drift in like. Time to take a bow, Lute thought, crawling up by the track. Then his hand met a wheel on the lead buggy, and he was able to put his weight on it and drag himself up. His hands hurt, his legs wobbled under him. Look, look! There was a kind of a wild scream from the barger, who spotted Lute rising. He's come back! He's alive! A second Lazarus! Lute looked across the buggy. On the other side there was a crowd around China, looking now at Lute. Though all they can see is his head and some of his torso, still they look, their eyes open, mouths simple, unanimous rounds of wonder. Christ, the man Lute recognized as Cherry Will said simply. I never saw anything like that coming out of the river before. And they all simply looked, playing the moment. Lute stared back at them across the buggies. He ran an index finger along his gums and spat richly to rid his mouth of mud and grit. Time to take a bow, he thought, wondering how that would look. Did he really save the kid or what? One man asks another. I pulled the kid out of the drink, Cherry Wills puts in. He discounts the man behind the buggy as not being a serious contender for the honor. He looks like a drowned rat, he said, meaning Lute supposed himself. Well, the kid ain't dead, that's for certain. He just threw up half the river. Behind them, someone speaks, a new voice. It comes into the scene in straw hat and spats, and a checkered suit, complete down to the watch fob and the stick pin in his necktie. Soaker Watson. Good old Soaks, Lute thought. What's he doing here? Good old Soaks, feeling comfortable, ready now to put his claim to fame. I should have known he'd be here sooner or later. Who got the boy out of the river? Why, I did, Cherry Wills said. I pulled him out. And Lute chose that very moment to make his move. Shuffling his legs, moving out, he felt the moment. Surely it was to be his to play the hero in, and as he moved, he felt the mud on him. God, he said to himself then, I can't go there looking like this, like a drowned rat, and in front of my old buddy Soaker. You fellas standing around for a reason? Soaker asked. We was helping. We wanted to see. We didn't have nothing better to do. Why isn't somebody working the barge? Why aren't you unloading scrap iron? It wasn't our job, Cherry Wills said simply. We wasn't assigned to unload barges. Well, now you're assigned, Soaker told them, producing a pad of paper and writing across 4 slips. Get that barger to run on over to the number 3 dock and unload the scrap. Yes, sir. The crowd broke up. Before Lute got his bow, the crowd was thrown over by his supposed friend Soaker Watson. "Hey, look at these shoes here, and the grip." Someone stopped to admire Lute's things. "Get going," Soaker waved him off, and the men cleared away, leaving Soaker Watson and China on one side of the scrap buggies and Lute on the other. "Lute, you can come out now," Soaker called. "Yeah, I guess I can," Lute said on his side before he showed himself around on Soaker's side. "Been swimming, was ya?" Soaker inquired. "Rejuvenation," Lute said back shyly. "I've been working away the old age wrinkles." "You are surely some sort of a mission angel," Soaker snorted. "When I saw you and Boney out there today, I thought good times had finally turned up. I thought you were bringing the golden good times, Lute." "I come up here to help my sister Emily. I didn't turn up for anything else," Lute said, feeling shy about asking for his pants. "Emily Hilton?" Soaker asked, beaming. "You come up here to help old Emily put the beans back on the larder shelf, have you?" "Yes, Why, it's a small world, like they say, Luther. Emily Hilton is my wife Clara's best friend." "Well, that beats the devil," Lute said, shaking his head, wishing he could ask for his pants. "What do we do now?" China asked then, coming back down after throwing up the last of the river water. "What do we do now?" He looked sick and wary. "Why, you'll have to go," Soaker said cheerfully. "You'll have to clear off a mill property." "Soaker!" Lute was amazed. "The boy didn't fall into the water on purpose. Nothing got hurt." "But it was an accident, Luther," Soaker told him. "And we had our quota with that last one, Jim Hilton's accident. You just have to go on home. We want to be sure they forget your names. A couple of weeks should do. Then I'll see about getting you some time." "A couple of weeks? What other kind of paying work around here beside mill jobs?" "That's policy," Soaker told him. "I can't do nothing about it if it's policy." Lute could see there was no arguing with him. "Then just hand me my pants," he said. "Hand me my pants and we'll shove out of here. Give me my pants, George," he said, calling Soaker by his proper name. "Check at the pay gate before you leave," Soaker Watson said to him, never getting the pants anyway, shrugging to show that he didn't like the way Lute named him. "You want to be sure of getting what's coming to you," he said, and turned and walked away. Lute was surprised at him. Soaker, the man who could ring mugs of beer like they was chimes, had turned his back and walked away. "Here's your pants," China said, handing them over the buggy. "And here's my bankroll," Lute said, producing the only money he had, $2, and he hauled his good pants on over his mud-caked legs and his wet drawers and stepped across the track. "What do you say to a visit down to Silver Susie's?" China said, wincing as Lute's dirty feet went down into those fancy two-toned shoes. "She'll likely reward you for saving me." "Are you selling your sister again?" Lute asked him incredulously. "Hell, China, you're going to keep that poor little lady flat on her back just to pay off your obligations." "I meant my grandmother, Mr. Trout," the boy said. "Silver Susie is my grandma. She'll reward you for saving me." Lute thought about that for a moment. His muddy drawers clung to the inside of his legs. It was nearly noon. What use was there in going to find Emily at this time of the day? He looked at China. "Sure," he said. "Let's go and see this grandma of yours."